We were pumped up for our hiking trip, excited to spend some quality time in the great outdoors. Our group consisted of me, Sarah, and a few other friends. We had all the essentials packed: water, snacks, and a map. Or so we thought. As we trekked deeper into the mountains, the scenery became more breathtaking with each step. But as the day wore on, we realized we might have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The trail seemed to disappear into thin air, leaving us stranded in the wilderness with no idea which way to go. Panic started to set in as we frantically searched for any signs of the trail. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor. With darkness looming, tensions among us began to rise. Sarah, always the voice of reason, tried to keep us calm. But as the hours passed and the darkness closed in around us, even her optimism began to wane. We were lost, alone, and running out of options. The forest grew eerily quiet as night fell, broken only by the sound of our footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent shivers down our spines. We stumbled through the darkness, our flashlights casting feeble beams of light into the blackness ahead. Each step felt like a leap of faith, as if at any moment we could stumble into the unknown. Exhausted and terrified, we huddled together for warmth, hoping against hope that someone would come to our rescue. But as the night dragged on, it became clear that we were on our own. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, enveloping us in its suffocating embrace. We were lost in a sea of trees, with no beacon to guide us home. As the hours ticked by, our fears grew more pronounced. Every shadow seemed to morph into something sinister, every sound an omen of impending doom. But just as we were on the brink of despair, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A faint glow in the distance, like a beacon calling us home. With renewed determination, we followed the light, stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste to escape the darkness. And as we emerged from the forest, blinking in the pale light of dawn, we realized that we had made it out alive. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave as we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but grateful to be alive. And as we huddled together, basking in the warmth of the rising sun, we knew that we would never forget the terror of that night in the woods. It was supposed to be a relaxing retreat, just me and nature, but things took a dark turn that I never could have anticipated. On the first night, as I sat by the campfire, enjoying the quiet of the forest, I heard footsteps approaching from the darkness. I tensed up, expecting it to be a fellow camper or maybe a ranger making their rounds, but when the figure emerged from the shadows, I felt a chill run down my spine. He introduced himself as Greg, a fellow outdoorsman who claimed to be camping nearby. At first, he seemed friendly enough, offering to share some food and swap stories around the fire. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something off about him, the way he kept glancing around nervously, as if he was hiding something. I tried to ignore my instincts, to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease that settled over me whenever Greg was around. And then, things took a sinister turn. As we were talking, Greg suddenly leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper as he confided in me about a game he liked to play in the woods, a game that involved hunting down unsuspecting campers and terrifying them for his own twisted pleasure. I felt my blood run cold as he spoke, realizing that I was alone in the woods with a dangerous predator who saw me as nothing more than prey. I knew I had to get away from Greg to escape before he could carry out whatever sick plans he had in store for me. So, I made up an excuse about needing to use the bathroom and slipped away into the darkness, hoping to put as much distance between us as possible. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that Greg was still out there, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to stay calm, to focus on finding my way back to civilization, but every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent me into a panic, convinced that Greg was right behind me, closing in with each passing moment. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I stumbled upon a clearing in the woods, where I saw the flickering lights of a cabin in the distance. Relief flooded through me as I realized that I had found sanctuary, that I was no longer alone in the darkness with Greg lurking in the shadows. I ran towards the cabin, banging on the door and shouting for help, praying that whoever was inside would hear me and come to my rescue. And thankfully, they did. The door swung open, revealing a couple who had been vacationing in the woods and were just as shocked to see me as I was to see them. I quickly explained my situation, telling them about Greg and the terrifying encounter I had just narrowly escaped. They listened with horror written on their faces, offering me shelter and promising to call the authorities as soon as they could. As I sat inside the warm, cozy cabin, surrounded by people who cared about my safety, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive, grateful to have escaped Greg's clutches before it was too late. Me and my girlfriend, we decided to go camping in the woods for the weekend. We thought it would be a fun way to get away from the city and spend some quality time together. Anyway, we found this secluded spot deep in the forest, far away from any other campers. It was perfect, just us, the trees, and the sounds of nature all around us. But then, on the second day of our trip, we stumbled upon this abandoned cabin hidden away in the trees. At first, we thought it was kinda cool, like something out of a horror movie or a ghost story. But as we stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. It was like the air was thick with some kind of energy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The cabin was old and decaying, with cobwebs covering the walls and dust coating the furniture. It was clear that nobody had been here in a long time. But that wasn't the scariest part. As we explored further, we found these strange symbols carved into the walls, like something out of a cult ritual or a sacrificial ceremony. And then, we found the basement. It was pitch black down there, and I could feel this sense of dread washing over me as we descended the stairs. But we pressed on, shining our flashlights into the darkness as we searched for clues about the cabin's dark past. And that's when we found it, a hidden room tucked away in the corner, filled with all kinds of horrifying artifacts. There were old photographs and newspaper clippings scattered around the room, detailing the grisly history of the cabin and the people who had lived there before. It was like something out of a nightmare, and I could feel my stomach churning with fear as we read through the articles. But the scariest part was still to come. As we were leaving the cabin, we heard this strange noise coming from the woods outside. It was like a low, guttural growl, echoing through the trees and sending shivers down our spines. We tried to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it was just an animal or something. But deep down, I knew that it was something much worse, something that had been lurking in the forest, waiting for unsuspecting victims to stumble upon its lair. We ran as fast as our legs would carry us, not stopping until we were safely back at our campsite. And even then, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us from the shadows and waiting to strike. But one thing was for sure, we would never forget our encounter with the abandoned cabin in the woods, or the horrifying secrets that it held within its decaying walls. I set out on my hike, eager to explore the beauty of the wilderness. The air was crisp, the sun shining down through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. It was the perfect day for an adventure. As I wandered deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I brushed it off as nerves, chalking it up to the solitude of the forest. But as the day wore on, the feeling only intensified. I tried to push the thought from my mind, focusing instead on the beauty of my surroundings. But every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a shiver down my spine. As the sun began its descent, I realized I had lost track of time. Nightfall was fast approaching, and I was nowhere near civilization. Panic started to set in as I realized I might have to spend the night in the woods alone. I quickened my pace, hoping to make it back to the trailhead before dark. But as I rounded a bend in the path, my heart stopped. A pack of wolves stood before me, their eyes gleaming in the fading light. I froze, my mind racing as I tried to remember what to do in this situation. I knew I had to stay calm, but fear gripped me like a vice. The wolves watched me with predatory eyes, sizing me up as if deciding whether I was worth the trouble. I knew I had to do something, but my legs felt like lead. With a burst of adrenaline, I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the silent forest. But the wolves were faster, their powerful legs propelling them forward with terrifying speed. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I fought to put distance between us. But no matter how fast I ran, the wolves were always right behind me. I could hear their growls growing louder, feel their hot breath on my neck as they closed in. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. Desperate, I searched for a way out, scanning the forest for any sign of salvation. And then, I saw it, a small cave hidden among the trees. With renewed determination, I sprinted towards the cave, the wolves hot on my heels. I dove inside just as they reached me, their snarls echoing in the darkness. I huddled in the back of the cave, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened to the wolves prowling outside. I knew I couldn't stay here forever, but I was too terrified to move. As the night wore on, the sounds of the forest grew quieter, the wolves retreating into the shadows. But I knew they were still out there, waiting for me to make a move. With trembling hands, I reached for my backpack, searching desperately for anything that could help me. And then, I found it, a small canister of pepper spray. Armed with my meager weapon, I waited for dawn to break, praying for a chance to escape. And when the first light of morning pierced the darkness, I knew it was now or never. Summoning all my courage, I burst out of the cave, spraying the wolves with pepper spray as I ran. They howled in pain and confusion, giving me the precious seconds I needed to put distance between us. I sprinted through the forest, my heart pounding in my ears as I raced towards safety. And when I finally emerged from the trees, battered and bruised but alive, I knew I had beaten the odds. As I stumbled back to civilization, I vowed never to underestimate the dangers of the wilderness again. And though the memory of that terrifying encounter would haunt me for the rest of my days. So, me and my buddies, we decided to go camping in this secluded valley we'd heard about. We thought it would be a great way to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and just relax for a bit. Anyway, we found this perfect spot by a stream, surrounded by trees and far away from any other campers. It was like our own little slice of paradise. But then, on the second night of our trip, things started to get weird. We were sitting around the campfire, just shooting the breeze and roasting marshmallows, when we heard this strange noise coming from the woods. At first, we tried to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it was just an animal or something. But then we heard it again, closer this time, and I could feel this sense of unease creeping over me. I glanced nervously at my friends, but they were all just sitting there, staring into the fire like nothing was wrong. It was like I was the only one who could hear it, the sound of something moving through the trees, getting closer and closer with each passing second. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a strange, silent figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just watching us with these empty, soulless eyes. I tried to point it out to my friends, to warn them about the danger lurking nearby, but when I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness like it had never been there at all. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong, that we were being watched by something far more sinister than we could have imagined. We decided to pack up our stuff and head back to the car, to get out of there before whatever was lurking in the woods decided to make its move. But as we were leaving, I felt this strange sensation, like something was following us, tracking our every move through the trees. I glanced nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching us with those empty eyes. But there was nothing there, nothing but darkness and silence stretching out into the night. We walked faster, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to put as much distance between us and whatever was out there in the darkness. And then, just when we thought we were safe, we heard it, the sound of something moving through the trees, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We broke into a run, our footsteps echoing through the forest as we raced to escape whatever horror was chasing us. But no matter how fast we ran, it was always right behind us, just out of sight but always there, lurking in the shadows. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my lungs burning with exertion as we pushed ourselves to the limit, desperate to get away from whatever was hunting us. And then, just when we thought we couldn't run any further, we burst out of the trees and into the clearing where we had parked the car. We didn't stop running until we were safely inside, the doors locked and the engine roaring to life as we sped away from that cursed valley as fast as we could. We didn't talk about what had happened, didn't mention the strange figure or the feeling of being watched. But deep down, we all knew that we had encountered something truly terrifying in those woods. I was out on a backpacking trip with a group of friends, enjoying the beauty of nature and the thrill of adventure. But our trip took a terrifying turn when a sudden storm rolled in, trapping us in the mountains with nowhere to seek shelter. The sky darkened ominously, and thunder rumbled in the distance as we frantically searched for a place to hunker down and wait out the storm. But as the rain started to fall in heavy sheets, we realized that we were running out of time. We stumbled through the wilderness, our clothes soaked through and our spirits sinking with each passing minute. Lightning crackled overhead, illuminating the landscape in brief, blinding flashes. We knew we had to find shelter fast, or risk being struck by lightning or swept away by flash floods. But as we trudged through the mud and the muck, it seemed like there was no end in sight. Just when we were about to give up hope, we stumbled upon a small cave nestled into the side of a hill. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from the elements, and we gratefully huddled inside, hoping that it would be enough to keep us safe. But as the storm raged on outside, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease that settled over me like a dark cloud. Something about the cave didn't feel right. It was too quiet, too still, as if we were being watched by something lurking in the shadows. I tried to push aside my fears and focus on staying warm and dry, but every rumble of thunder and flash of lightning sent my heart racing with fear. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard a low, rumbling sound coming from deep within the cave, a sound that sent shivers down my spine and made my blood run cold. I knew then that we weren't alone in the cave, that there was something else lurking in the darkness with us. I tried to warn the others, to tell them that we needed to get out of there before it was too late, but they brushed off my concerns, chalking it up to nerves and exhaustion. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. Whatever was in that cave was dangerous, and we needed to leave before it was too late. I pleaded with my friends to listen to me, to trust my instincts, but they just laughed it off, telling me I was being paranoid. But as the storm raged on outside and the rumbling grew louder and closer, I knew that time was running out. Desperate and terrified, I made a split-second decision to leave the cave and brave the storm in search of help. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that staying in that cave was a death sentence. So, I gathered up what little courage I had left and stepped out into the raging storm, the rain pelting down on me like bullets as I fought my way through the darkness. But just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a faint glimmer of light in the distance, the glow of a cabin nestled among the trees. With renewed hope, I pushed forward, ignoring the pain and exhaustion as I raced towards the safety of shelter. And as I stumbled up to the cabin door, battered and bruised but alive, I knew that I had made the right choice. I collapsed on the doorstep, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for someone to answer my frantic knocks. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, the door swung open, revealing a kind face peering out at me with concern. I couldn't believe my luck. I had made it out of the storm alive, thanks to the kindness of a stranger who took me in and helped me warm up and dry off. As I sat by the fire, sipping hot tea and listening to the comforting sound of the rain on the roof, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive, grateful to have survived the terrifying ordeal in the mountains. But as I looked back on the night's events, I knew that I would never forget the fear and the uncertainty that had gripped me in those dark hours. I went camping alone in a remote forest, seeking some time away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The first few days were peaceful, just me and the sounds of nature surrounding me as I hiked through the trees and set up my campsite. But then, one morning, I woke up to find my campsite abandoned and my belongings scattered across the forest floor. At first, I thought maybe I had just forgotten to pack up properly before heading out for the day, but as I looked around, I realized that something wasn't right. I felt a sense of unease creeping over me as I searched for clues, trying to figure out what had happened to my campsite. And then, I saw them, footprints leading away from the clearing, deeper into the forest. My heart started pounding in my chest as I realized that I was now alone out here, that someone, or something, had been in my campsite while I slept. I tried to stay calm, to think logically about what to do next, but fear gnawed at the edges of my mind, threatening to overwhelm me. I knew I had to find out who, or what, had been in my campsite, to confront whatever danger lurked in the shadows of the forest. So, I followed the footprints deeper and deeper into the woods, my senses on high alert for any sign of danger. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move from the darkness of the trees. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of branches snapping behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned to face whatever was coming towards me. And then, emerging from the trees, I saw him, a man, tall and menacing, with a wild look in his eyes that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to run, to escape, but he was faster, stronger than I could have ever imagined. He grabbed hold of me, dragging me deeper into the forest with a strength that was inhuman. I struggled against his grip, fighting for my life as he dragged me towards a secluded clearing hidden deep in the woods. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of something in the distance, the faint glow of a campfire, flickering in the darkness. I knew then that I had to escape, to break free from my captor before it was too late. So, I mustered up every ounce of strength I had left and fought back with everything I had, lashing out at him with all my might. And miraculously, it worked. He stumbled backwards, giving me just enough time to break free and run towards the safety of the campfire. As I stumbled into the clearing, gasping for breath, I realized that I was now alone. There were other campers there, people who had been drawn to the warmth and light of the fire just as I had. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaking, but relieved to be alive, to have escaped the clutches of my would-be attacker. And as I sat there, surrounded by the comforting glow of the campfire and the reassuring presence of my fellow campers, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night in the woods, or the strength and resilience that had helped me survive. We were out hiking, enjoying the fresh air and the tranquility of nature. The trail we had chosen was remote, far from the bustle of city life. It was just the two of us, seeking some time away from the chaos of everyday life. As we walked, we stumbled upon a small clearing in the forest. That's when we saw them, a group of locals, standing around a campfire. They looked at us with hostility, their eyes narrowed and their mouths set in grim lines. We hesitated, unsure of what to do. But before we could turn back, one of the locals stepped forward, blocking our path. "Y'all shouldn't be here," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "This here's our territory. You best turn around and leave while you still can." We tried to reason with him, explaining that we were just out for a hike and meant no harm. But the locals weren't interested in hearing our excuses. With a warning glare, they turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving us alone in the clearing. We exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. Ignoring the warning, we pressed on, determined to continue our hike. But as we ventured deeper into the forest, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and move around us, and every rustle of leaves made us jump. We quickened our pace, eager to put some distance between us and the unsettling encounter. But no matter how fast we walked, we couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It hung over us like a dark cloud, casting a pall over our once idyllic hike. As the sun began to set, we realized we were hopelessly lost. Panic set in as we realized we had no idea which way to go. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps behind us. We turned, expecting to see another hiker or maybe even one of the locals from earlier. But what we saw chilled us to the bone. It was the same group of locals from the clearing, their faces twisted into sneers of malice. Without a word, they began to pursue us, their footsteps echoing through the forest. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to put as much distance between us and our pursuers as possible. But no matter how fast we ran, they were always right behind us. They seemed to know the forest like the back of their hands, navigating it with ease as they closed in on us. We were desperate, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we pushed ourselves to the limit. But the locals showed no signs of tiring, their determination unrelenting. As night fell, we stumbled upon a small cabin hidden deep in the woods. It was our only chance for refuge, our only hope of escape. We threw open the door and rushed inside, barricading it behind us as we caught our breath. But even as we huddled together in the darkness, we knew our ordeal was far from over. The locals were still out there, waiting for us to make a move. And as the hours dragged on, we knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. With trembling hands, we searched the cabin for any sign of a weapon or a way to defend ourselves. But our efforts were in vain. There was nothing but empty rooms and dusty furniture. As dawn broke, we knew we had to make a run for it. With no other choice, we threw open the door and sprinted into the forest, hoping against hope that we could outrun our pursuers. But they were waiting for us, their faces twisted into masks of hatred as they closed in. We ran faster, our legs burning with exertion as we pushed ourselves to the limit. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we stumbled upon the trail we had lost the day before. With a surge of adrenaline, we sprinted towards safety, the sounds of our pursuers fading into the distance behind us. We were out on a canoeing trip down a remote river, seeking adventure and a break from the monotony of everyday life. The sun was shining, the water was calm, and everything seemed perfect as we paddled along, laughing and joking with each other. But as we rounded a bend in the river, we encountered a series of deadly rapids, swirling currents, jagged rocks, and treacherous obstacles that threatened to capsize our canoes at any moment. We paddled frantically, trying to steer clear of the most dangerous parts of the rapids, but it was no use. One by one, we were tossed about by the churning waters, our canoes spinning out of control as we struggled to stay afloat. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, one of our group went missing, swept away by the raging river before we could even react. Panic set in as we realized that our friend was in serious danger, lost somewhere in the treacherous rapids with no way for us to reach him. We called out his name, searching desperately for any sign of him amid the swirling waters, but he was gone, swallowed up by the river's merciless embrace. Fear gripped us as we realized that we were not the only ones navigating the river's dangers. There was something else out there, something lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike when we least expected it. We paddled on, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to outrun whatever unseen threat was stalking us from the depths of the river. But no matter how fast we paddled, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were following our every move from the darkness of the riverbanks. And then, just when we thought we couldn't take it anymore, we heard the sound of branches snapping behind us, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests as we turned to face whatever was coming towards us, praying that it wasn't the same fate that had befallen our missing friend. And then, emerging from the trees, we saw him, a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, with a look of madness in his eyes that sent shivers down our spines. We tried to paddle away, to escape, but he was faster, stronger than we could have ever imagined. He grabbed hold of our canoe, pulling us towards the riverbank with a strength that was inhuman. We struggled against his grip, fighting for our lives as he dragged us towards a secluded clearing hidden deep in the woods. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we saw a glimmer of something in the distance, the faint glow of a campfire, flickering in the darkness. We knew then that we had to escape, to break free from our captor before it was too late. So, we mustered up every ounce of strength we had left and fought back with everything we had, lashing out at him with all our might. And miraculously, it worked. He stumbled backwards, giving us just enough time to break free and paddle towards the safety of the campfire. As we stumbled into the clearing, gasping for breath, we realized that we were not alone. There were other campers there, people who had been drawn to the warmth and light of the fire just as we had. We collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaking, but relieved to be alive, to have escaped the clutches of our would-be attacker. So, me and my buddies, we decided to go camping in this remote area known for its old mine shafts. We thought it would be cool to explore them, just for kicks. Anyway, we found this old shaft hidden away in the woods, covered in moss and half hidden by fallen branches. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. But as we started to explore, we noticed something strange. There were signs of recent human activity down there. Footprints in the dirt, fresh scratches on the walls, that kind of thing. We tried to brush it off, to convince ourselves that it was just some hikers passing through or something. But deep down, I think we all knew that something wasn't right. As we delved deeper into the darkness, the air grew colder and the walls seemed to close in around us. It was like we were descending into another world, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon a horrifying secret hidden deep underground. It was a makeshift camp, with sleeping bags scattered on the floor and empty cans of food strewn about. But that wasn't the worst part. There were also tools, knives, and other weapons lying around, like whoever had been living there was preparing for something. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I realized that we weren't alone down there, that someone or something had been watching us from the shadows. We tried to leave, to get out of there before whatever was lurking in the darkness decided to make its move. But as we turned to go, we heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnel, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We froze in terror, our hearts pounding in our chests as we waited for whatever horror was about to reveal itself. But when nothing happened, we summoned up the courage to continue on our way. And that's when we found her, a young woman, chained to the wall of the mine shaft, her eyes wide with terror as she begged us for help. We didn't waste a second. We rushed to her side, breaking the chains that held her captive and helping her to her feet. She was shaking with fear, her skin pale and clammy to the touch. We didn't stop to ask questions. We just grabbed her hand and ran, our footsteps echoing through the tunnel as we raced to escape whatever nightmare lurked in the darkness. But as we neared the entrance to the shaft, we heard the sound of footsteps behind us, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We didn't dare to look back. We just ran faster, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prayed for a miracle. And then, just when we thought we couldn't run any further, we burst out of the shaft and into the blinding light of day. We didn't stop running until we were safely back at our campsite, the adrenaline coursing through our veins as we tried to make sense of what had just happened. We never did find out who the woman was or why she was down there. But one thing's for sure, we'll never forget the terror of that night. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway, just me and the great outdoors. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. I arrived at the campsite early in the afternoon, pitching my tent in a secluded clearing deep in the forest. The air was crisp and clean, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As the sun began to set, I decided to explore the surrounding area, curious to see what secrets the forest held. That's when I stumbled upon it, a hidden clearing tucked away among the trees. At first, I thought it was just another part of the forest, but as I drew closer, I realized there was something different about it. There was an eerie energy in the air, a feeling of unease that sent shivers down my spine. I crept closer, trying to get a better look at what was happening in the clearing. That's when I saw them, a group of cloaked figures gathered around a makeshift altar, their faces obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. It was like something out of a nightmare, a twisted ritual straight from the depths of hell. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before they noticed me lurking in the shadows. But as I turned to leave, a twig snapped beneath my foot, echoing through the silent forest like a gunshot. The cultists froze, their heads snapping in my direction as they searched for the source of the noise. I held my breath, praying they hadn't seen me. But it was no use, they had spotted me, their eyes burning with an unholy fire as they advanced towards me. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as I desperately tried to put as much distance between us as possible. But they were faster, their footsteps closing in on me as I stumbled through the forest. I could hear them chanting behind me, their voices rising in a cacophony of madness and despair. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I fought to stay ahead of them. But no matter how fast I ran, they were always right behind me, their twisted forms looming in the darkness like specters from another world. I could feel their hands reaching for me, their fingers brushing against my skin as I raced through the forest. I screamed, the sound echoing through the trees as I fought to escape their clutches. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a small stream cutting through the forest. Without hesitation, I plunged into its icy waters, the shock of the cold driving the breath from my lungs. I fought against the current, struggling to keep my head above water as I was swept downstream. But even as I battled against the raging torrent, I could hear the cultists' voices growing fainter in the distance. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I emerged from the water battered and bruised, but alive. The cultists were nowhere to be seen, their twisted ritual left behind in the depths of the forest. I staggered back to my campsite, my heart still pounding in my chest as I collapsed beside the dying embers of my campfire. I knew I would never forget what I had seen in that hidden clearing, the memory of it haunting me for the rest of my days. But as I lay there in the darkness, I also knew that I had survived, that I had escaped the clutches of those twisted cultists and lived to tell the tale. So, I was out hiking in the woods, trying to clear my head and get away from it all for a while. I'd been walking for hours, and the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That's when I stumbled upon the cabin. It was hidden away in a clearing, surrounded by thick trees and overgrown bushes. At first, I thought it was abandoned, but as I got closer, I could see that the door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go inside. But then the wind picked up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I didn't have much of a choice. I had to seek shelter for the night. So, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was stale and musty, and the floorboards creaked under my weight as I made my way further into the cabin. That's when I saw them, the human remains, scattered around the room like discarded trash. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what I was looking at, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with horror as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But there was no denying it, this cabin was the lair of a deranged killer, and I had stumbled right into their clutches. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before the killer returned and found me in their hideout. But as I turned to leave, I heard a noise, a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere deep within the cabin. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to see through the darkness. But there was nothing there, nothing but shadows and silence. I knew I had to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as I made my way to the door, I stumbled over something, a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug in the corner of the room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I lifted the trapdoor to reveal a set of stairs leading down into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go down there. But then I heard another noise, a faint whimpering coming from somewhere deep within the darkness. I knew I couldn't leave whoever was down there to suffer alone. So, I gathered up my courage and descended into the depths of the cabin. The air grew colder as I made my way down the stairs, and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. But I pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency and desperation. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled upon a sight that chilled me to the bone. It was a room, small and cramped, with chains hanging from the walls and a single figure huddled in the corner. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized who or what I was looking at. It was a person, barely alive and covered in bruises and cuts. I rushed to their side, my hands shaking as I tried to free them from their chains. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the killer was lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. I didn't dare to look behind me as I worked, my hands moving as quickly as they could as I tried to free the person from their bonds. And then, finally, the chains fell away, and I helped them to their feet. We didn't waste a second. We ran, our footsteps echoing through the darkness as we raced to escape the cabin and the horrors that lurked within. And then, just when I thought we were safe, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the darkness behind us, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We didn't dare to look back. We just ran faster, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prayed for a miracle. And then, finally, we burst out of the cabin and into the blinding light of day. We didn't stop running until we were safely back at the trailhead, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. We didn't speak as we made our way back to civilization, our minds reeling with the horrors we had witnessed. I went on a solo camping trip, seeking solace in the quiet of the wilderness, but what I found was far from peaceful. From the moment I arrived at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, just beyond my line of sight. As night fell and darkness descended upon the forest, my paranoia only intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twigs, sent shivers down my spine, and I found myself jumping at the slightest sound. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was nothing out there but the trees and the animals, but deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I built a fire, hoping that the warmth and light would keep whatever was out there at bay, but it offered little comfort as I huddled close, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it, a low, guttural growl echoing through the trees, sending chills down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to listen for any other sounds, but all I heard was the eerie silence of the forest at night. I tried to tell myself that it was just an animal, but something about the sound didn't sit right with me. It was too deep, too menacing, like nothing I had ever heard before. I considered packing up and leaving, but the thought of wandering through the dark woods alone was almost as terrifying as whatever was out there, so I stayed put, clinging to the dwindling hope that it would all just go away. But as the hours passed and the fire burned low, my fear only grew stronger. Every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. I didn't sleep that night, too afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down even for a moment. I sat by the fire, my eyes trained on the darkness, waiting for dawn to break and the nightmare to end. And then, finally, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I had made it through the night in one piece. But as I began to pack up my things and prepare to leave, I heard it again, that same guttural growl, closer this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. I turned to see a figure emerging from the trees, shrouded in darkness and moving with an unnatural grace that sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I didn't wait around to see what it was. I grabbed my pack and ran, sprinting through the forest as fast as my legs would carry me, desperate to escape whatever lurked behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, heart pounding in my chest and lungs burning with exertion. And as I drove away from that cursed campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly sinister, something that lurked in the darkness and watched me with hungry eyes. I never went camping alone again, haunted by the memory of that night and the terrifying realization that I was now alone in the wilderness. Me and my buddies decided to go backpacking in the wilderness, to get away from it all and enjoy some nature. We were all excited for the trip, looking forward to spending some time outdoors and bonding over the experience. But things took a turn for the worse pretty quick. We were hiking along a trail, enjoying the scenery and chatting away, when we stumbled upon a bear. At first, we froze, not sure what to do. But then, the bear started growling and snarling, and we knew we had to get out of there fast. We started backing away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements that might provoke the bear. But it kept coming closer, its eyes locked on us like we were its next meal. Panic started to set in as we realized we were completely outnumbered and outmatched. We knew we had to do something, but we weren't sure what. So, we did the only thing we could think of. We ran. We sprinted through the forest, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to put as much distance between us and the bear as possible. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like the bear was right on our heels, never far behind. Just when we thought we couldn't run anymore, we stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. It was like a godsend, a wide open space where we could see for miles in every direction. We collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as we tried to catch our bearings. But our relief was short-lived, because that's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. We turned to see a group of men emerging from the trees, armed with rifles and shotguns. They had a menacing look in their eyes, like they were out for blood. We knew we were in trouble, but we had no idea how much until they started firing at us. Bullets whizzed past our heads as we scrambled to find cover, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fought for survival. We ducked behind trees and rocks, trying to avoid the gunfire as best we could. But it was like they had us pinned down, like they knew exactly where we were at all times. Panic started to set in as we realized we were trapped, caught between a bear and a group of armed men who seemed intent on killing us. We knew we had to come up with a plan, and fast. So, we huddled together and tried to come up with a plan. We knew we couldn't outrun the bear, and we definitely couldn't outgun the men. But maybe, just maybe, we could outsmart them. We waited until the men were distracted, then made a break for it. We ran as fast as we could, ducking and weaving through the trees as we tried to put as much distance between us and our attackers as possible. And miraculously, it worked. We made it out of the forest alive, shaken and terrified, but alive. We didn't stop running until we were safely back at our campsite, where we collapsed in a heap, grateful to be alive. It was a terrifying experience, one that we'll never forget. We were on a family camping trip, just looking to spend some quality time together in the great outdoors. We found a remote campground nestled deep in the woods, far away from civilization, where we hoped to escape the stresses of everyday life. But things took a turn for the worse pretty quickly. As soon as we arrived at the campground, we started to notice strange things happening. Eerie noises echoed through the trees at night, and mysterious shadows seemed to dance just out of sight whenever we looked. At first, we tried to brush it off, attributing the strange occurrences to the natural sounds of the forest. But as the days went by, the phenomena only seemed to intensify, and our unease grew with it. One night, while we were sitting around the campfire roasting marshmallows, we heard a blood-curdling scream pierce the silence of the night. It sounded human, but there was something otherworldly about it, something that sent shivers down our spines. We huddled together, clutching each other tightly as we tried to make sense of what we had heard. But before we could come up with an explanation, we heard it again, the sound of something moving through the trees, coming closer and closer with each passing second. Fear gripped us as we realized we were not alone in the woods, that something malevolent was lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. We knew we had to get out of there, to find safety before whatever was out there found us. We packed up our things as quickly as we could, our hands trembling with fear as we fumbled with the tent poles and sleeping bags. But just as we were about to leave, we heard a voice calling out to us from the darkness. It was soft at first, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves, but it grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment. It sounded like a woman's voice, but there was something wrong about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then, we heard another scream, this one much closer, much more terrifying than before. And that's when we knew we had to get out of there, to leave the campground and never look back. We ran through the forest, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to put as much distance between us and whatever was out there as possible. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like we were being pursued, like something was right behind us, waiting to strike. We stumbled out of the woods and into the clearing where we had parked our car, gasping for breath as we collapsed to the ground. But our relief was short-lived, because that's when we saw it, a figure standing in the shadows, watching us with eyes that glowed in the darkness. Panic set in as we realized we were still in danger, that whatever was stalking us in the woods was still out there, still hunting us down. But we didn't have time to dwell on it, because that's when we heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. We turned to see a group of people emerging from the trees, armed with weapons and wearing masks that hid their faces from view. They had a menacing look in their eyes, like they were out for blood, and we knew we were in trouble. But we didn't give up hope. We fought back with everything we had, using whatever makeshift weapons we could find to defend ourselves against our attackers. And miraculously, it worked. We managed to fight them off long enough to escape into the safety of our car, where we locked the doors and sped away into the night. It was a terrifying experience, one that would haunt us for the rest of our lives. But we survived, and that's all that matters. We made it out of the woods alive, our family intact and stronger than ever. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and we were looking forward to a few days of relaxation and adventure in the great outdoors. But as we set up camp and settled in for the night, something felt off. It was subtle at first, a strange rustling in the bushes, a flicker of movement out of the corner of our eyes, but it was enough to put us on edge. We tried to brush it off, to focus on enjoying our time together, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger as the night wore on. And then, just as we were getting ready to turn in for the night, we stumbled upon it, a hidden bunker, buried deep in the heart of the forest. Curiosity got the better of us, and we couldn't resist the urge to explore. But as we descended into the darkness of the bunker, we realized that we had stumbled upon something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. The bunker was filled with a series of deadly challenges, traps and puzzles designed to test our wits and push us to the limits of our endurance. And as we struggled to navigate the twisted game set before us, we realized that we were playing for our lives against a sadistic adversary. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of the situation. We were trapped in the bunker, with no way out and no idea or what was behind the deadly challenges that surrounded us. We tried to stay calm, to focus on finding a way to escape, but the fear gnawed at us, threatening to consume us from within. Every twist and turn seemed to lead us deeper into the labyrinth of the bunker, further from the safety of the outside world. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. One by one, members of our group fell victim to the deadly traps, pitfalls, tripwires, pressure plates, until it was just a few of us left, struggling to survive against all odds. But we refused to give up hope. We banded together, determined to find a way to outsmart our adversary and make it out of the bunker alive. With each challenge we faced, we grew stronger, more determined to overcome whatever obstacles stood in our way. And as we worked together to solve the puzzles and evade the traps, we realized that we were not just fighting for our own survival, but for the survival of our friends as well. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clue, a hidden passage leading out of the bunker, towards the light of freedom. With renewed determination, we followed the passage, hoping it would lead us to the answers we so desperately sought. But as we ventured deeper into the darkness, the challenges grew more deadly, more impossible to overcome. And then, just when we were on the brink of despair, we saw it, a glimmer of light shining through a crack in the wall. We rushed towards it, our hearts pounding in our chests as we realized we were finally free. But as we emerged from the bunker, we were met with a sight that chilled us to the bone, our adversary, waiting for us, a twisted grin on their face as they raised a weapon, ready to claim their final victory. But we were ready for them. We fought back with everything we had, our screams echoing through the forest as we confronted our tormentor, determined to make it out alive no matter the cost. And in the end, our determination paid off. With a final blow, we defeated our adversary, sending them fleeing into the darkness as we emerged victorious from the bunker, battered but alive. We were out camping in the wilderness, just my wife, our 2 kids, and me, seeking some quality family time away from the hustle and bustle of city life. But what we found out there was far from the peaceful retreat we had envisioned. It all started when we stumbled upon a clearing deep in the woods, a place that seemed untouched by human hands. As we set up camp, we noticed something odd, a series of strange markings etched into the trees surrounding the clearing, symbols that seemed almost primal. At first, we didn't think much of it, chalking it up to some local kids playing a prank or maybe even a bit of wildlife activity. But as the night wore on and darkness fell upon the forest, things took a turn for the worse. We heard strange noises echoing through the trees, low, guttural growls that sent shivers down our spines and made the hairs on the back of our necks stand on end. We tried to ignore it, to tell ourselves that it was just the sounds of the forest at night, but deep down, we knew that something was wrong. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, moving with an otherworldly grace that sent chills down our spines. It was a child, or at least, it looked like one, but there was something off about him, something primal and feral that made my skin crawl. We tried to approach him, to offer him help and shelter, but he recoiled at the sight of us, his eyes white with fear and mistrust. It was then that we realized the truth. This child had been living alone in the woods for years, fending for himself in a world that had long forgotten him. We didn't know what to do. Part of us wanted to take him with us, to offer him a chance at a better life, but another part knew that he belonged to the forest now, that he was a part of something ancient and wild that we could never hope to understand. As we debated our next move, we heard more noises echoing through the trees, not just the growls of the feral child, but something else, something far more sinister. And then, just like that, the clearing was engulfed in darkness, the sounds fading away into nothingness as if they had never been there at all. We packed up our camp in a hurry, eager to put as much distance between us and whatever lurked in the shadows of the forest. But as we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than we had ever imagined, something that the forest would do anything to protect. We were just a group of backpackers, setting out on a hiking trip in the mountains, excited for a weekend of adventure and exploration. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, so we were unprepared when a violent storm suddenly rolled in, catching us off guard. As the rain began to pour down and the wind howled around us, we realized that we were in serious trouble. We scrambled to find shelter, but there was nowhere to hide from the fury of the storm. We pressed on, hoping to find refuge in a nearby cave or overhang, but the terrain grew increasingly treacherous as the rain turned the trail into a muddy mess. With each step we took, the wind seemed to grow stronger, threatening to knock us off our feet and send us tumbling down the mountainside. We clung to each other for support, knowing that one wrong move could mean disaster. As the storm raged on, we became increasingly desperate, searching frantically for any sign of shelter. But the mountains offered little respite from the elements, and our situation grew more dire by the minute. Exhausted and soaked to the bone, we stumbled upon a small cabin nestled in a clearing, its windows boarded up and its door hanging off its hinges. It was a welcome sight, but something about it sent shivers down our spines. Despite our reservations, we had no other choice but to seek refuge inside. We huddled together in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside as we prayed for morning to come. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. We heard noises coming from the walls, faint whispers and eerie laughter that sent chills down our spines. We tried to brush it off as nothing more than the wind playing tricks on our minds, but deep down, we knew that something was terribly wrong. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. The walls of the cabin began to shake violently, as if something was trying to tear its way inside. Panic set in as we realized that we were trapped, with no way out and no one to help us. We huddled together in fear, praying for the storm to pass and for morning to come. But as the hours dragged on, it became clear that we were not alone in the cabin. Shadows moved in the darkness, whispering our names and reaching out to us with icy fingers. We knew then that we had to get out of there, no matter the cost. With a renewed sense of determination, we made a break for the door, pushing past whatever unseen force was trying to hold us back. And as we burst out into the storm, we were met with a sight that chilled us to the bone. The cabin was gone, vanished into thin air as if it had never existed. So, me and my buddies were always up for an adventure. We decided to go exploring in the mountains, looking for something cool to check out. We stumbled upon this abandoned village, and man, it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The buildings were all falling apart, like they hadn't been touched in centuries. There was this eerie feeling in the air, like we were being watched by something unseen. But we shrugged it off and started exploring. We found all sorts of creepy stuff, old houses filled with broken furniture, rusty tools lying around, and weird symbols carved into the walls. At first, it was all just kind of spooky, you know? But then, things started getting really weird. We heard these strange noises coming from the woods, like something was moving around out there. And then, we found evidence of some kind of ritual that had taken place in the village centuries ago. There were these old altars covered in dried blood, and weird symbols etched into the ground. We were all freaking out by this point, but we couldn't tear ourselves away. We had to know more about what had happened in this place, even if it meant putting ourselves in danger. But then, things took a turn for the worse. We heard this loud rumbling noise coming from the ground, like something big was moving beneath us. And that's when we saw them, these giant, shadowy figures emerging from the earth. We knew we had to get out of there fast, but it was like we were frozen in place, unable to move. We watched in horror as the figures got closer and closer, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they attacked. They came at us from all sides, their long, twisted limbs reaching out to grab us. We fought back as best we could, but it was like trying to fight off a swarm of angry bees. They were everywhere, overwhelming us with their sheer numbers. But then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. One moment, they were there, and the next, they were gone, leaving us standing there in the ruins of the abandoned village, shaking with fear. We knew we had to get out of there, so we hightailed it back to our campsite as fast as our legs would carry us. We didn't stop running until we were safely back in civilization, far away from that cursed village. And even now, weeks later, I still can't shake the feeling that we're being watched, that those ancient guardians are still out there, waiting for us to return. But one thing's for sure, I'll never go back to that village again, not for all the treasure in the world. We set out on our adventure, a group of friends seeking excitement and thrills in the wilderness. Our destination? An abandoned village nestled deep within the mountains, rumored to be haunted by the ghosts of its past. As we trekked through the rugged terrain, anticipation hung heavy in the air, mingling with a sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of our minds. But we pushed forward, eager to uncover the secrets hidden within the crumbling ruins of the village. When we finally arrived, the sight that greeted us was eerie yet captivating. Buildings lay in ruins, their walls crumbling and their windows shattered. Nature had begun to reclaim the land, with vines snaking their way up the decaying structures and trees stretching their branches towards the sky. Despite the desolation, there was a strange beauty to the place, a sense of history that hung thick in the air. We wasted no time in exploring, each step taking us deeper into the heart of the abandoned village. But as we ventured further, we began to notice signs of something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that seemed to pulse with a dark energy that sent shivers down our spines. And then, we found it, evidence of a dark ritual that had taken place centuries ago. Altars stained with dried blood, bones scattered across the ground, and relics of an ancient civilization that seemed to whisper tales of unspeakable horrors. Despite the warnings that echoed in the back of our minds, we couldn't resist the urge to uncover the truth, to delve deeper into the mysteries of the abandoned village. But as we disturbed the village's ancient guardians, we quickly realized that we had awakened something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. It started with whispers in the wind, voices that seemed to echo through the trees and bounce off the crumbling walls of the village. We tried to brush them off as tricks of the imagination, but they grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment. And then, the shadows began to move, twisting and writhing in the darkness, taking on shapes that seemed to defy logic and reason. We watched in horror as they slithered closer, their cold tendrils reaching out to ensnare us in their grasp. Panic set in as we realized that we were now alone, that something malevolent lurked in the shadows, waiting to drag us down into the depths of despair. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fled from the village, the echoes of our footsteps drowned out by the sinister whispers that pursued us. But no matter how fast we ran, the darkness seemed to follow, swallowing us whole and threatening to consume us with its insatiable hunger. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a hidden passage leading out of the village, a glimmer of light in the suffocating darkness. We raced towards it, our lungs burning with exertion as we fought to escape the clutches of the ancient evil that pursued us. And then, finally, we burst out into the open air, the warmth of the sun washing over us like a balm for our weary souls. We collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as we realized that we had narrowly escaped with our lives. But even as we lay there, battered and bruised, we knew that the horrors of the abandoned village would haunt us forever. We never spoke of our ordeal again, each of us carrying the weight of our shared trauma in silence. But the memory of that fateful day would linger in our minds, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of our reality. We were just a group of friends, heading out for a camping trip near a remote lake, looking forward to a weekend of relaxation and outdoor adventure. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and everything seemed perfect as we set up camp by the water's edge. But as the sun began to set and darkness fell over the lake, things started to take a dark turn. We began to notice strange occurrences, shadows moving in the trees, whispers on the wind, a sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. At first, we brushed it off as nothing more than our imaginations running wild, but as the night wore on, the strange happenings grew more frequent, more intense, until it was impossible to ignore the feeling of dread that gripped us. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. One of our group went missing, disappearing from our campsite without a trace as we searched frantically for any sign of their whereabouts. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of the situation. We were alone in the wilderness, with no way to call for help and no idea what dangers lurked in the darkness. We tried to stick together, to watch each other's backs as we searched for our missing friend, but fear has a way of tearing people apart, of turning friends into enemies as suspicion and paranoia take hold. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clue, a torn piece of clothing caught on a nearby branch, the only sign of our friend's whereabouts. With renewed determination, we followed the trail, hoping it would lead us to the answers we so desperately sought. But as we ventured deeper into the forest, the shadows grew darker, the whispers louder, until it felt like we were walking straight into the heart of darkness itself. And then, Just when we were on the brink of despair, we stumbled upon it, a hidden clearing deep in the heart of the forest, a glimmering lake shimmering in the moonlight. But as we approached the water's edge, we realized that something was terribly wrong. The lake seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, its waters black as night and icy cold to the touch. We knew then that we had stumbled upon the lake's dark secret, a curse that condemned all who entered its waters to a fate worse than death. But we were determined to escape, to find a way out of the nightmare that had engulfed us. With our hearts pounding in our chests, we made a break for it, running as fast as we could through the darkness, desperate to put as much distance between ourselves and the cursed lake as possible. And as we emerged from the forest, we were met with a sight that chilled us to the bone, our missing friend, standing before us, their eyes empty and hollow as they beckoned us back to the water's edge. We knew then that we were trapped, that there was no escape from the curse that had claimed us. But we refused to give up hope, to surrender to the darkness that threatened to consume us. With one final burst of strength, we turned and ran, fleeing into the night as the cursed lake called out to us with its siren song, promising eternal torment to all who dared to enter its waters. But we were alive, and that was all that mattered. As we made our way back to civilization, we vowed never to return to that cursed place again, haunted by the memory of the lake and the horrors that lurked within its depths. We decided to spend some quality father-son time on a camping trip, hoping to bond over nature and adventure. The woods seemed like the perfect escape from our busy lives, offering peace and tranquility far from the hustle and bustle of the city. As we set up our campsite, the air was filled with excitement and anticipation. The crackling of the fire and the chirping of crickets provided the soundtrack to our evening, creating a sense of serenity that enveloped us like a warm blanket. But as night fell, a chill crept into the air, casting a shadow over our peaceful retreat. We shrugged it off as nothing more than the natural cooling of the evening, but deep down, a sense of unease began to gnaw at the edges of our minds. As we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of the leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down our spines, leaving us on edge and paranoid. But we brushed off our fears, chalking them up to nothing more than overactive imaginations. After all, what could possibly be lurking in the woods besides the usual nocturnal creatures? However, our sense of security was shattered when we heard the sound of voices echoing through the trees. At first, we dismissed it as the chatter of fellow campers, but as the voices drew nearer, we realized that something was very wrong. Peering through the darkness, we caught sight of figures emerging from the shadows, locals who lived deep in the woods, their faces twisted into sinister grins that sent chills down our spines. They approached our campsite with a menacing swagger, their eyes gleaming with malice as they sized us up like prey. We tried to reason with them, to explain that we were just here to enjoy a peaceful camping trip, but they were not interested in hearing our pleas. Instead, they circled around us like wolves, their laughter echoing through the night as they taunted and teased us with their cruel words. As the tension mounted, I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach, a sense of dread washing over me like a tidal wave. It was clear that we were in serious danger, and I knew that we needed to get out of there before it was too late. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I grabbed my son's hand and made a run for it, dodging through the trees in a desperate bid for freedom. But no matter how fast we ran, the locals were hot on our heels, their laughter echoing through the darkness like a sinister chorus. We pushed ourselves to the limit, our lungs burning with exertion as we raced through the woods, praying for salvation. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight, a safe haven from the horrors that pursued us. Without hesitation, we bolted into the clearing, collapsing to the ground in exhaustion as we caught our breath. But even as we lay there, panting and gasping for air, we knew that our ordeal was far from over. For hours, we lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest as we waited for dawn to break. And when the first light of morning finally filtered through the trees, we wasted no time in packing up our campsite and fleeing the woods, vowing never to return. As we made our way back to civilization, the events of the previous night haunted us like a nightmare, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. But despite the terror we had endured, we emerged from the woods unscathed, our bond stronger than ever as we clung to each other for comfort and support. And as we drove away from that accursed place, leaving the horrors of the night behind us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me, grateful to be alive and safe once more. We were just a group of friends, heading out into the forest for a weekend hunting trip. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, a chance to relax and enjoy each other's company while doing something we all loved. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, things started to take a dark turn. We began to notice signs of someone else's presence, footprints in the mud, broken branches, the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. At first, we brushed it off as nothing more than the work of another group of hunters, out enjoying the wilderness just like us. But as the day wore on, the signs grew more ominous, more sinister, until it was impossible to ignore the feeling of unease that hung heavy in the air. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon it, a makeshift campsite hidden deep in the heart of the forest. Tattered tents, empty beer cans, a flickering fire that had long since burned out. But what chilled us to the bone was the sight of something else, something hanging from a nearby tree, swaying gently in the breeze. It took us a moment to realize what it was, a deer carcass, gutted and skinned, its lifeless eyes staring blankly into the distance. We knew then that we were not alone in the forest, that there was someone out there, watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We tried to stay calm, to focus on the task at hand, but the fear gnawed at us, threatening to consume us from within. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig, sent shivers down our spines as we searched for signs of our unseen adversary. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. One of our group went missing, disappearing without a trace as we searched frantically for any sign of their whereabouts. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of the situation. We were being hunted, stalked like animals by someone who saw us as nothing more than trophies for their collection. We knew we had to find a way to escape, to outwit our pursuer and make it out of the forest alive. But with each passing moment, the odds seemed to grow more insurmountable, more impossible to overcome. We tried to stick together, to watch each other's backs as we navigated the treacherous terrain. But fear has a way of tearing people apart, of turning friends into enemies as suspicion and paranoia take hold. And then, just when we thought all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clue, a trail of blood leading deeper into the forest, towards the source of our torment. With renewed determination, we followed the trail, hoping it would lead us to the answers we so desperately sought. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, the danger grew more intense, more palpable, until it seemed like there was no way out. And then, just when it seemed like all was lost, we saw it, a clearing in the distance, a glimmer of hope shining through the darkness. We ran towards it, our hearts pounding in our chests as we realized we were finally free. But as we emerged from the forest, we were met with a sight that chilled us to the bone, the deranged hunter, waiting for us, a wicked grin on his face as he raised his weapon, ready to claim his next trophy. We knew then that our ordeal was far from over, that we would have to fight for our lives if we wanted to escape the clutches of our tormentor. But we were determined to survive, to make it out of the forest alive, no matter what horrors lay ahead. And so we charged forward, our screams echoing through the trees as we confronted the hunter, ready to face whatever terrors awaited us in our quest for freedom. But just as the hunter raised his weapon, ready to strike, a sudden noise rang out from the trees, the sound of approaching sirens, the flashing lights of rescue vehicles illuminating the darkness. In that moment of distraction, we seized our chance, rushing past the hunter and into the safety of the waiting arms of the authorities. The hunter was quickly apprehended, his twisted game brought to an end as he was led away in handcuffs, his reign of terror finally over. We were shaken, scarred by our ordeal, but alive. And as we were driven away from the forest, back to the safety of civilization, we knew that we had survived, that we had faced our fears and emerged victorious. It was a harrowing experience, one that would stay with us for the rest of our lives. But in the end, it had brought us closer together, bonded us in a way that nothing else could. And as we looked back on our time in the forest, we knew that we would never forget the horrors we had faced, but we would also never forget the strength and courage we had shown in the face of adversity. We were just a group of friends out for a hike, looking forward to a day of adventure and exploration in the great outdoors. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and everything seemed perfect as we set off along the remote trail. But as we ventured deeper into the wilderness, things started to take a dark turn. We began to notice strange markings on the trees, symbols that seemed out of place in the natural world. At first, we brushed it off as nothing more than a prank, the work of some mischievous kids trying to scare us. But as the day wore on, the markings became more frequent, more elaborate, and more sinister. We tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over us, but it was impossible to ignore the sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. And then, without warning, disaster struck. One of our group stumbled into a hidden pitfall, disappearing from sight in an instant. We rushed to their aid, but it was too late. They were gone, swallowed up by the earth. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of the situation. We were alone in the wilderness, with no way to call for help and no idea or what was behind the deadly traps that surrounded us. We pressed on, determined to find a way out of the nightmare that had engulfed us. But with each step we took, the traps seemed to grow more elaborate, more deadly, as if our unseen assailant was toying with us, enjoying our terror. We tried to stay together, to watch each other's backs as we navigated the treacherous terrain. But fear has a way of tearing people apart, of turning friends into enemies as suspicion and paranoia take hold. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. Another member of our group fell victim to a snare, their screams echoing through the forest as they were hoisted into the air, helpless and terrified. We were running out of options, running out of time. We knew we had to find a way to escape, to uncover the identity of our attacker before it was too late. But as we searched desperately for answers, we only seemed to dig ourselves deeper into the nightmare that surrounded us. Every step we took seemed to lead us further into danger, further into the clutches of our unseen enemy. And then, just when we were on the brink of despair, we stumbled upon a clue, a piece of fabric caught on a branch, torn from the clothing of our attacker. With renewed determination, we followed the trail, hoping it would lead us to the answers we so desperately sought. But as we ventured deeper into the forest, the traps grew more elaborate, more deadly, until it seemed like there was no way out. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, we saw it, a clearing in the distance, a glimmer of light shining through the trees. We ran towards it, our hearts pounding in our chests as we realized we were finally free. But as we emerged from the forest, we were met with a sight that chilled us to the bone, a lone figure standing before us, a twisted smile on their lips as they watched us approach. We knew then that our ordeal was far from over, that we had stumbled into the lair of our attacker, and that the nightmare was only just beginning. But we were determined to survive, to fight our way out of the darkness and into the light. And so we charged forward, our screams echoing through the forest as we confronted our tormentor, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead in our quest for freedom.